Welcome back. I am going to do another book review right now. First, a note. So, I think at least some of the books that are more connected to current events are going to remain also on YouTube, but some of my other book choices might just be on alt tech. So, just bear that in mind. My latest video, which was the re upload of yesterday's live stream after the debate, it should be up on, it is up on Library, BitChute, and Rumble, as well as YouTube. So all of those are working. Hopefully it will continue to work on Rumble. It's a little bit here and there. I think I have the settings down, so hopefully there won't be any issues. Now, this book today is called Disloyal Opposition, and it is by Julie Kelly, who's a journalist. She actually works at the same publication that I write for, sometimes American Greatness. Now, before people ask, "Oh, do you know her?" No, I mean, I think she's also written for the Federalist and some of these other major publications, but she is several ranks up above, and one of these more full-time journalistic people. And reading the book, I want to say that yes, I will totally understand if you start to say, well, this is getting repetitive. She's harping on the same things. But the main theme does really get hammered home, which is that if you're talking about the movement that was called Never Trump, starting in 2015 and 2016, among people who are career Republicans, this does document broadly the movement. Now, I know that there are some people that don't really fit into this mold, and she doesn't really mention them, like Justin Amash, or she doesn't really go into some of the people like John Kasich, or he's actually broken completely with the Republican Party. He's endorsed Joe Biden, or some of the very wishy-washy Republicans like Larry Hogan or Charlie Baker, these governors of blue states who don't feel that they can openly support the Republican president, even though they're the Republican chief executive of their state. So it really is, I would say, a little bit more specific to people who are pundits and people who are professional political operatives who have continued to call themselves principled conservatives, principled Republicans, but have continued to oppose Donald Trump. And I will say, just to get this out of the way, in 2016 itself, you could have said that I would have fit in with a little bit of the Never Trump profile. Now, I probably would not have voted for someone like Marco Rubio if he would have been nominated, but I was wholly on board with trying to stop Trump during the primary. I did vote for, and this is, obviously this is something that I don't feel proud about, but in the primary here in Ohio, I voted for John Kasich for one reason, which was that he had the most likely chance of defeating Donald Trump. It wasn't because I was particularly inspired by Kasich. In fact, as an Ohioan, I can remember that his tenure here as governor was, just a very, it was very anticlimactic. Like, this is a person, he got into office and he promised that he would be sort of the representative of Ohioans against the Obama administration and rejecting a lot of the policies that Obama was seeking to expand federally. And in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that John Kasich did very much. In fact, towards the end of his second term, which he won very easily thanks to a very, very weak Democratic Party in 2014, one that hardly could field a candidate. They fielded a candidate called Ed Fitzgerald. So I'm a little bit on a tangent right now, but to put some perspective on this, Kasich had run on a very pro-life platform, and this is why I'm sort of segueing back into the book. John Kasich had run on a very pro-life platform, and by the end of his second term, which was coinciding with the midterm elections in 2018 when Trump was already president, he had started to backslide and say, well, I'm not going to sign the Ohio heartbeat bill, which overwhelmingly passed the legislature in Ohio, the House of Representatives and the Senate here in Ohio, or whatever we call it. Well, we call it the General Assembly, both houses. So for many people who are staunchly pro-life, and I know people who are, they say, why is it so important or whatever. If you look at Ohioans as a whole, we're probably more religious than, we're not as religious as people in the South or the Southwest, but we have a lot of people who are attending church, even people in urban areas. They go to their traditional Catholic church or whatever it is. Some of, we have evangelicals that are very strong here, various startup churches and things like that. Ohio is one of the more pro-life states in the Midwest. So it was a major betrayal, and it is just emblematic of the betrayals that the Never Trumper Republicans have made of really the conservative principles. Now, getting back to the book, I know that I went on a very long tangent there, but it is important. A lot of the people who are covered in the book, Jennifer Rubin, Bill Kristol, Rick Wilson, you have David French, you have Joshua, I think his name is Joshua Goldberg, or Jonah Goldberg, I think his name is, former National Review guy. These are people who they cut their teeth really portraying themselves as these ideological conservatives, these, the bulwarks. They ended up founding like a very obscure blog called The Bulwark. That's what's so ironic about it. But the bulwark of conservatism in an increasingly liberal world. And they would have these conferences for many years. It was way before the Trump movement even started. At places like the Heritage Foundation or the Hoover Institute or the American Enterprise Institute. And yeah, I understand why some people want to work at those places, because you get paid some money to write about things that you're probably passionate about. Certainly I would be, I would very much like to be able to make money off of things that I generally think are important, right? And it just hasn't worked out that way for me. But these are people that they were either career pundits, or they were career journalists, or they were career political advisors in the case of Rick Wilson. And or Michael Steele. They didn't really mention Michael Steele, the former head of the DNC, or sorry, the former head of the Republican National Committee. Michael Steele is an ardent Never Trumper. And these are people who they just lived within that system for many years, the system of think tanks and would-be journalism and punditry. And unfortunately in fortunately for the country, but unfortunately for them, in 2016 they continued to hold to the notion that all the patterns that had determined who would be the nominee and therefore the person to guide the Republican Party going into 2016 would hold, and that somebody would emerge, somebody of the mold of Mitt Romney, someone like Marco Rubio, someone, they didn't necessarily like Ted Cruz. I think they would have probably gotten over it if he would have been nominated. Sorry. They despised people like Rand Paul. They probably would have had a little bit of a problem with Ben Carson. I think, like Cruz, they might have gotten over it. But in reality, they they were really people who wanted not somebody who would represent a vision for accomplishing things, but just a vision for getting back into sort of the groove where they were in the halls of influence. And there are people within the Trump administration like that. So I don't want you to get the sense that I'm saying this is exclusive, or that Julie Kelly is saying that this is exclusive to the Never Trump movement. There are people. Remember Anthony Scaramucci, who was originally, he said, "Oh, I love President Trump. I think he's a great president or whatever." And now he can't stand him. There's a lot of shallow people around President Trump as well. This book details a lot of the people who have relentlessly tried to make a career out of just appearing to be quote unquote principled conservatives when in reality they're just people who they lived so long a lifestyle of um, just pretending to have ideas, and in reality they're just very shallow and careerist people. So when you have people who are lifelong, they opposed affirmative action, they opposed climate change legislation, things like carbon taxing. They opposed for many years. Most of them still oppose Medicare for all, right? And I of course have made I've made many statements. If you go back to the beginning of the channel where I dealt a lot with the healthcare system, I've said I despise Medicare for all. I would never vote for it. I would personally never, ever, ever endorse that system. But I would certainly agree that the Medicare for all system is a more honest and representative system than what Obamacare became, because Obamacare was set up to fail. These people, they are ardently against Medicare for all, but now they want to save Obamacare, which when Obama was in office, they considered to be basically the end of the United States. They were constantly crowing about how awful it was, and it is awful, by the way. Don't get me wrong. And you can probably go back, look at old posts of mine on Facebook, look at maybe some articles that I've written in the past, many videos that I've put out where I detail specifically why Obamacare was a colossal failure, and all the well-intentioned articles by the people who supported it could not make it work because the model itself is fallacious. And I had deep discussions at the time. The truth is Obamacare has largely fallen out of the public public buzz. Most people aren't talking about it. But the truth is that these are people that they continue to oppose Medicare for all, but they don't have any vision for healthcare. This is something that was talked about in the debate. People were saying, "Oh, Trump, you don't actually have a healthcare plan." Well, neither do the Never Trumpers, and to a large extent, neither does Joe Biden, and neither do the Never Trumpers who support him, because they are saying, well, we want to expand Obamacare. We want to build on top of Obamacare, which was at its heart, it was a healthcare initiative that punished people who could not pay for healthcare insurance, right? I remember very well because I was, an hourly wage worker who made probably less than $30,000 a year, and I had to pay a penalty every year for not having health insurance. It was awful. It showed really the way that many people are, they're just excluded from the main focus of what government is about. They don't legislate solutions that are accessible to the average person. And that's what Obamacare was about. Now, some of these people, of course, Bill Kristol, this is something that Julie Kelly really, really focuses on. Not so much Obamacare, which is, maybe I've gone, again, another tangent here. So you may, if you want, if you don't like my review because it doesn't reflect the book, you may downvote the review and then put a comment. I want to learn about the book. But, okay, here's really what she delved into. The main figures in the book, people like Jennifer Rubin and Bill Kristol, they had for many years been part of the warmonger caucus within the GOP. They never run for elective office, but they were always saying, well, you need us in order to create a robust foreign policy where We will fight terror and we will spread democracy across the globe. And Crystal and his cohorts, and this is unfortunate because I'm Jewish, they are Jewish. Their actions reflect on people like me and reflect on people I know because they claim, we're here to, support regional stability in the Middle East and all that. And people, unfortunately, they look at people's identities and they see, well, what's that? What the hell is this guy's problem? He's constantly looking at war, and they see that he's of Jewish origin. Well, unfortunately, some of these people happen to be, more than a few of these people happen to be of Jewish origin. People like Bill Kristol, and he did untold damage to American foreign policy by advocating for the Iraq War, by advocating for other wars later, such as in Syria, and war in Iran, which thank God that it hasn't happened. And they've never apologized for any of the failed foreign policy decisions they've made. The Iraq War, had it never happened, had Americans been given the proper warning by the media and by public officials who would have had a little bit of courage to say and do the right thing. Imagine if the Iraq War had never happened. I think that we might have had at least a more, how many lives would have been saved, first of all, and how much less of a bitter society would we have had. And it's because of people like Bill Kristol and his Weekly Standard crew of goofs that the Iraq War was just cheered upon by a lot of these so-called conservatives. They're called neoconservatives, of course. And then the other issue, okay, and she does address this. I don't think she addressed it in the depth that I would have, but it is talked about in many different ways. These are people, like with Obamacare, they originally believed that climate change was just, it's a natural phenomenon. It's not anthropogenic. Global warming is not something that humans can necessarily impede. Like, obviously, there's things that we do to the planet that are harmful to natural habitats and harmful to various there's obviously some effect that people have on the environment in specific places where they live, and that could have various ramifications for the world ecosystem as a whole. But the notion that carbon dioxide is the driving factor in climate change is really what's been up for debate. And many of these conservatives, especially like Jennifer Rubin, which is an issue that she points out and is something that I remembered as well, she had gone within a month, I think it was in 2017, from condemning the Paris Climate Accord to singing its praises when Donald Trump withdrew from it. So people like that, Jennifer Rubin from the Washington Post, people like David French, who is constantly talking about the erosion of norms and decency in society, when like David French wants conservatives to act decent and be civil and all of that, when a lot of these people are losing their jobs. This is what's so frustrating. There's people who lose their jobs because they don't believe in affirmative action. They don't believe in white privilege. They don't believe in the notion that you can end the fetus's life simply because you feel it's an inconvenience to your life. You can be fired from your job if you don't believe that, if you believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. Now bear in mind, okay, let's say I was to come out, and I certainly, I'm one of these people. I don't think that I'm among these holy rollers that are, evangelicals. I don't think I'm one of these people who seeks to mix religion with government and the law. Imagine if I was to walk around my job and just proclaim, this whole marriage thing is bullshit. I mean, people should be basically able to screw anyone they can. Or if I was to say that I think that basically bestiality, if I was to pull a Cenk Uygur, I would say, well, bestiality isn't that big of a deal, like he did, right? It's possibly less likely, okay, that I would be fired than if somebody was to say, well, I don't really think that two dudes or two women should get married, or I think that children born in a certain, children should not be given uh hormones or puberty blockers if they have certain gender identity issues or they've been prescribed them. These are issues that they're toxic right now for people to touch, and yet you have idiots like David French who lost his job at the National Review because people couldn't stand him anymore because he was constantly browbeating evangelical Christians about how awful they are because he says, well, you all the time talk about the sanctity of marriage, but you voted for a person who cheated on two of his wives when he ought to know. I mean, this is, I don't agree with evangelical Christianity at all, but they believe that it is within, I think, something about, it's within Christ's power to forgive all sins or something like that. Look, it doesn't take an expert to know that Christianity is in many ways about forgiveness and about redeeming yourself from sin. Even if you're not a Christian, you understand it. So it's just very ineffective, and I would say that unfortunately, as a country, that we're just going. I mean, I don't know what the outcome of the election is going to be, but you can be assured that there is permanent wounds that have been created from the past few years, and the Never Trumpers are one of the reasons that these wounds have been so deep, because these are people like Ana Navarro. This is a woman who her family is from Nicaragua, which I've covered a lot of topics concerning the dictatorship there, the communist leadership there, the deprivation of human rights there, and I apologize if I haven't been updating you that much on it lately, but it just hasn't been. First of all, there hasn't been too much news on it, in my opinion, and second of all, I've been busy with many other things. But this is a woman who, instead of criticizing the dictator of her home country, who seeks, she sides with now the Democratic Party, which in many ways is seeking to impose the same type of leadership here, right? She's not a principled person. People like Daniel Ortega, they support ideas like packing the Supreme Court and basically removing all constraints on presidential power and on creating a one power state, which is exactly what he did in Nicaragua. So I would say that the main takeaway from this book, and Julie Kelly she dwells a little bit on the Iraq War, she dwells a lot on the personal records and the wrong predictions of Bill Kristol and people like that. The main takeaway of the book is that when you have people who have become professionally involved in politics, but they're not elected. Nobody votes for some of these idiots. The ones who, the Jonah Goldbergs, who they write a huge blog about, they're making a mockery of the legal system and things like that, without actually understanding what, in his case it was with Russiagate. How could he possibly, why would he bring any doubt onto the intelligence services and all that? Like, people are just, they know how transparently retarded that sounds when you have intelligence agencies that have consistently been wrong about various countries around the world. Ding, 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 Iraq. They've been consistently wrong about, they've been misleading the public about their surveillance of private citizens, right? Remember Edward Snowden? So these are people who they are, how Antifa, they all the time they talk about, oh, bootlicker, you support the state. The Never Trumpers are everybody should have to agree. I mean, how can you not call them bootlickers, whether you're on the right or the left? They constantly talk about, the norms and about how society needs to have standards that are standards of expression and decency and all of that, but they support the most indecent people that there are, the people like James Clapper of the NSA, the people like John Brennan of the CIA, the people like Jim Comey, who went to Congress today and basically for a couple hours, Jim Comey should be the mascot of the Never Trump movement, right? He spent most of his career as a so-called registered Republican. People always wave that around, registered Republican. By the way, Chris Wallace, the debate moderator yesterday, registered Democrat. Does that make a difference? Right? So people make a big deal about Comey being a registered Republican. And then he goes to the committee today, or was it yesterday? He went to the committee yesterday, and he basically behaved like an utter buffoon. Claimed when he was asked about specifics, he couldn't remember. When people read him memos and actual documents that showed the contradiction in the statements that he had been made, he said, "Well, I don't really agree with that characterization." And then at the same time, he hemmed and hawed about how, oh, we need to return to a more decent period and a more civil society and more consistent values and all that garbage. This is like, instead of talking about your values, why don't you talk about the truth? Why don't you talk about the things that are more important? And why don't you talk about actually, safeguarding the liberties and freedoms that people need in order to live in an actual open society, right? If people are constantly being spied on, their data is being traded by corporations and by intelligence agencies, they're being surveilled, they're being fed this commercial bullshit, ads all the time. If people are being, they're having their Fourth Amendment rights being violated, something that, with all this BLM garbage, they don't really talk about the NSA and the surveillance state that much, because these people would be fine, the far left, they would be fine doing the same disgusting police state tactics as the Never Trumpers support, because they would simply use it for a different ends. So yeah, I would say you might as well, like, if you're more into, I guess, the political aspect of the Never Trump movement, the professional journalist, quote unquote journalist and pundit aspect of it, it might interest you. It doesn't go and expand on all of the different weird so-called conservative people who, they still believe, they still call themselves principled conservatives, but they support a candidate who is full on for abortion. People like John Kasich. So I was looking a little bit for that. It wasn't there. But that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me on BitChute, Minds.com, Subscribestar, Gab, Library, Parler, and now Rumble. And have a great day.